All right, so this video is going to be about MGB heater valves. This is kind of inspired by what must be like the fourth post that I've seen on Facebook, and quite often a lot of complaints about people talking about how their heater valves are leaking. And other people still, they complain about how there's not enough flow and that the heater doesn't really get hot. They'll troubleshoot the heater core, but it comes back to the valve. So what I'm going to do today, this was I've done a little bit of research. I found a post on the MG Experience forum, and the MG Experience had a post in there from 2006 from a Bob Munchausen, who did a hand-drawn diagram. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'll put a post in the description, a link to the description for that post. And some of the diagrams that he posted, I'll put those in an image here right now. But I'm going to go through that with you here. I'm going to take this thing apart, disassemble it. I'm going to try to make the improvements that he suggests. And add to his handwritten drawings a video that shows how you can improve the performance of your heater valve. It's kind of an interesting design. First off, you can see the diaphragm here is connected with like a claw type attachment that connects between the pressed steel components and the aluminum housing that allows water to go from the engine block here and then out to the heater there. So there's a valve right inside here somewhere, and we're going to get to that and find a way that we can make that valve open a little bit further. So first thing you need to do, you can see on here that all you really need to do is give this a turn, not even a quarter turn, just to engage these teeth off of that piece of aluminum. But what's keeping that is this goofy little rivet. Instead of any kind of a fastener, they just put a rivet. It's a little aluminum rivet. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to drill this rivet out, and then we're going to open up this top piece and see what's in there. I wouldn't do this with a brand new one. This one's kind of nasty and I wouldn't trust it. So I'm happy to take this one apart and share with you the inner workings of this mystical device. So let's go ahead and drill that rivet out. Like everything, it wants to spin, so I'm going to put a pair of pliers on there. Here we go. All right, so that rivet's gone. I don't think this is going to give itself up that easy. There's a lot of rust on here. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to pre-treat this with some WD. A bit of WD-40 in there, some penetrating oil, whatever penetrating oil that you prefer. All right, we'll let that sit a little while and we'll come back and give it a tap. And put this little flange here up against this. This hammer will give me a lot of inertia. I should just be able to tap on this right here and we might get some movement. There you go, just like that. It comes right off. Okay, so the next thing you'll notice is that this doesn't want to come off this direction because there's a little retaining cap here. So I'm going to pull this thing off. All right. Should just be able to put a small screwdriver in here. pull that away. Don't want it to go spraying, so I'm going to put my fingers in the way. There we go. All right, so there's this cap. There we go. All right, so this is static. The only thing that moves in here, whoops, this little spacer here is for this mechanism right up in here. This runs on a ramp. So when you turn it, the ramp basically pulls this centerpiece upward. See how it pulls up? So that little clip here holds on this, and when this runs up that ramp, it pulls this shaft upward, this direction. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to get this apart right here. You can see, well, I can feel it with my hands. There's a rubber diaphragm right here. I want to be careful. This is probably where a lot of the leaking occurs when you buy a brand new one. This is where the leak will happen. So let's see if we can get this without destroying this diaphragm. All right, so you can see I took a little pair of channel locks here and able to grab the outside edge, and this will slide up like that. Inside here you can see there's a little bit of sealer, some kind of silicone sealer that they put on here during the manufacturing process. I think that was intended for this entire area right around here to get a good seal when you put this back down on there. So the parts are stacking up. Now here you can see that rubber diaphragm. When you pull on this, pull on this right here, you can see it go up and down. That diaphragm flexing. That's the on and off right in there. Okay, so let's see if we can get this thing to come apart. On the one piece. Yeah. Okay, so this right here, this little spring right here, this is what closes against the seat surface. And it's on masty, that is. I'm so glad I took this apart. And I'm also glad I didn't put this right straight into service. Because it would have been leaking. The heater would have been stuck on all the time. So, you can clean this out real quick. You can see inside here, that's the surface that this would have seated on to turn it off. See that right there? Now, this little dealy bobber right here is supposed to have a clip similar to this clip right here that would hold the end of this on, and it's missing. So this is a defective unit right here, or it's been worn out or broken, but that clip is supposed to be on there to hold this on. As it is right now, this is unserviceable. But in the diagram that Bob Munchausen talks about, he suggests that you decrease, or if you put pressure on this spring by adding some small washers in here to make this shorter, then when this shaft rises, it'll have a longer distance to rise, and when it closes, it'll have to move further to close. That will use this entire ramp. You want to use the entire ramp. And so what he suggested is to add some small washers on here to make that spring take up some of the slack on that spring so that it's shorter. So that's what we're going to work on. I'm going to get some parts. You can see this has got that silicone sealer on here, remnants of it. I don't even know if this is even going to be usable. It doesn't look bad. I mean, the rubber is still nice and pliable, but it's got a lot of this rubber goop on it here. We'll see how it cleans up. But anyway, regardless, you can see the mechanism here. And this is the spring and this flat surface right here would seal against that flat surface right there, and it would prevent the water from flowing from the engine block out to the heater. And so what the objective of this is to make sure that when this valve opens, it opens far enough to allow an unfettered flow of water from the block to the heater coil. So that this whole ball section right here, water would come up out through here and then go down into this hole and go out to the heater. So I'm gonna halt it right here. We'll do some cleanup, and I'm gonna see if I can find at the hardware store something small enough to put on that little clip that's missing. That is missing. And we'll see if we can make this thing work. Lord knows if it's ever going to seal right. I think it will. It won't be a problem. Because this is all just a bunch of silicone goo. That's just goo. And we'll move forward from there. Okay, we got everything all cleaned up. See, I've got this little channel right in here, all cleaned out to bare metal. Make sure there's not any more old silicone sealer in there. One of the reasons why these things leak is, this diaphragm will fail, or the seal between the diaphragm and these two metal components starts to leak. So that's in order to get a really good seal, you're going to make sure you have metal to metal or metal to rubber. So when you put your silicone sealer in there, you get a really good connection. And so this is nice and clean. You can see on the back side here, I left this bare metal. I didn't paint this. I did de-rust this whole thing, soaked it in phosphoric acid for a while. But then this is high temp engine paint, so we don't have to worry about that. So this is nicely painted and it won't rust anymore. This is a metal surface, and it's going to be part of the sealing component. So I didn't put any paint on there. And actually, once you get this all in there, it's got to connect to the other piece of metal down in there. So we're going to put some more silicone sealer in there as well, but that has to be bare metal instead of being painted. So I taped that off so it wouldn't be painted. This was soaked in phosphoric acid and not painted, but lightly oiled with WD-40, so it won't rust, not immediately anyway. We've gone to the hardware store and got some washers. Again, according to Bob Munchausen's solution, you just need to add a little bit of a washer in there to create a space so that this plunger has a better travel when you're opening and closing it. I chose copper washers over standard steel washers because the spring was copper, so it kind of hinted to me that the antifreeze needed to be copper. This is a very small clip, the only smallest clip that I could find. It is still not small enough, so I'm going to have to pinch it a little bit tighter. It is the right size per se, in that the gauge of metal is the right thickness to go into that little gap. Let me get a little closer here. The gauge of metal is the right thickness, but the diameter is a little bit off, and you can wiggle it and make it come off. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller by tightening it with a pair of pliers to make it so it's a little more springy, and we'll put that on there. So let's get into the assembly. So before I put these washers in, I want to do a standard installation. See, I've got the little clip in there. It holds that little hoo-ha. That's the flange that's going to close. So the idea here is that when it closes, you have this spring that will force it closed, right? And that way you don't have to worry about the pressure of the water pushing this open, right? So that's what the spring is for. But there's a lot of travel in that spring. And so what we're going to do by putting these washers in is we're going to reduce the travel in the spring and gain travel in the valve so that we can open and close it. So in order to verify that we're getting more travel, I'm going to do a dry run with this installation, and I'm going to measure how far it opens when it's in the standard basic installation here versus with the washers. So let's go ahead and put this together. I'm going to put it together dry. See, it kind of just sits in there. It's actually against the spring. It's in a closed position when you put it together. So you can see, I don't know if you can get down in there, you can see very well. But anyway, you can feel the spring is activated. So I'm going to put this in a dry with no goo or anything, and we'll get a recording of how much travel we get. Okay, so with the dry, there's a basic installation, and you can see that it's seated. You can see in there it's seated. The default position is seated. You can see it's already halfway on the travel. You would expect it to be down further, down here when it's closed, but by default it's closed in the halfway position. So, and when you pull it up, this is applying more heat. This is the travel that we get. Let's measure that. So I'm measuring from the clip to the edge. All right, I'm going to leave that there. We'll come back after we disassemble it and put the washers in and see how much travel we get. As far as it goes, just to there. All right, so I got this in place. I've got 2 small copper washers in here. You can see that I used copper because it seemed like that's what they were using on the spring and the little shim on the bottom down here. This is aluminum. So I think the idea here behind these materials is they didn't want it to rust. So by using the copper washers, we're not creating a rust source. So anyway, got those babies on there. First thing you notice when you put it in place is it closes, but the spring is not engaged. So it's sitting flat. It's closed. You can feel that it touches, but it's not sitting above on the spring. So that's the first thing that I notice on that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue this, and then we'll take that measurement. Okay, so assembled with those washers, and I think you can see them in there. I got those washers in there. They are not interfering with the sealing surface, so that's not a problem there. But the first thing you notice straight away is where the default position is, and that the spring is not engaged, although it's closed, because you can push it to a pressure position where you can engage that spring, but the spring is not engaged by default. So that's you're gaining extra right off the bat. So let's take that measurement. Whoops. Get this all the way back on again. Here we go. Okay, so let's take that measurement. Now it looks a lot bigger. So all the way at the top now, you gained, it looks like a whole 1/8 of an inch. Definitely more play. As you can open it a lot further. So I think that's a really valuable solution, and hats off to Bob Munchausen. His forum suggestion in the MG experience seems to be valid. So let's go ahead and do the final assembly on this. I got to take all this apart and start putting the sealer in. I think I'm going to put a little sealer on the touch of that little connector on the bottom, just to make sure that it doesn't come loose or anything. So, all right. All right, so I picked a high temp silicone sealer. This is the reason why I picked this one in particular is it's high temperature. It'll last up to 650 degrees. Now, heaven forbid the coolant in my car ever gets to 650 degrees, but that's high enough. The other thing I mentioned that I noticed on here that made me want to buy this one was it resists oil, water, and antifreeze. And so there's plenty of other sealers out there, but this one specifically is made for cooling systems. So let's get to moving this. I'm going to run a bead through. In this channel. This is going to get messy, and I'm not going to go too liberal, but I'm not going to go light on it. I can clean it up after the fact. All right. Do want to make sure I don't cause any clogs in the heater system, so that's one thing. I want to put a little dab on the end here just to make sure that everything stays aligned. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to glue it closed, but I don't want that little pin to come off. Obviously the OEM, the original equipment one, the clip came off because it was missing. Hopefully this will prevent that from happening just by creating basically a rubber band or a filler so that it won't move around. Everything will stay aligned. Okay. All right. So the channel that I just filled up with the silicone, this ridge right here is going to go into that. And it's going to come out over the top. And I am absolutely okay with that. Okay. Now I'm going to put a ring around the outside of this. Very light ring. Because I'm going to put this piece on next. This goes over the top of that and it will squish those down. So let's make a sandwich. We get a good seal between the metal and the rubber. There we go. And if you recall, when I took apart the previous one, there was extra silicone up underneath inside here. So I'm sure this is the same method that they used. All right. That baby will go on there. Squish it down. Clean this up. All right, so now we're just going to put this back on in place, and you have to orient where the rivet's going to go. So we need to make sure that this is going to go on in the right position and in respect to where the mounting brackets are going to go. So when you're orienting this extra tab right here, between the tab and the rivet mark, this tab right here goes right over the top of this tube. So you want to set it up Hang on. And give it your quarter turn or whatever. Right over the top. Just like that. And that, aside from a rivet that I'm going to put in right here, should be the number. Now I've got to put the little clip on. But if I keep the clip off, then I can move this without worrying about it being spring-loaded. I can move it and get that rivet really easily. All right, so let's put a rivet in there. All right, rivet gun and a 1/8 inch rivet. If you have been working on MGs at all, you should know that a rivet gun is required equipment. There's so many places where they use rivets. So you just throw that right in that hole. Give it a couple cranks. And there you go. This thing is installed. See the little rivet sitting right there? And that fills that hole. That will keep it from moving back and forth anymore. So let's go ahead and put this retaining pin on the top and be done. Of course, I'm going to wipe up some of this mess, but that, as they say, is that. Click. Bob's your uncle. All right, so I won't be able to test this on the engine, but later on I'll do a video on a follow-up to show you the difference in the performance and verify that it in fact does not leak. But that, in review, is a modification suggested by Bob Murdoch, or not Murdoch, Munchausen, from a 2006 forum entry on the MG Experience online forum. I'll put a link again in the description. And what the objective of that is to increase the travel so that you can open the heater valve wider and get more flow and still get a good closure. So by adding a couple of washers in there. And it's also a demonstration about how, if you got a little leak, you can troubleshoot that leak, because sometimes buying new parts isn't always our solution, because a lot of times these parts are just BS anyway. So I hope that helps somebody going in the future. 1977 MGB heater valve.